Tony. We should also.
Thank you very much. First one's Kamilé, second one's love, and third section is New York. If we have it in Arabic, this is the word for Kamilé. This is love, and that's New York. I color-coded, so hopefully it won't be too confusing if you don't speak Arabic. But you'll notice that this is the correct order. So it's going from right to left. This is how Arabic is supposed to look. This is fully comprehensible. And I didn't change anything about the base direction. So that's what these little indicators on the bottom are. In this case, it's this HTML, and this is the direction attribute. And so you might think to yourself, well, this seems to be working fine, so there's nothing I really need to worry about this, right? Well, here's where the sort of abstraction comes in, and the concept of base direction. If you were to combine English and Arabic in the same bit of text, you'll start encountering some interesting, funny things. So far, this looks okay. Kamilé loves, and then we just wrote the word New York in Arabic. Kamilé loves New York. Still just fine. Let's think of this in terms of how what this would look for an Arabic speaker, or the equivalent, so to speak. If I change the Arabic, so now we have a problem. Now remember, the purple word is the first one, that's Kamilé. The red word is the second, that's loves. And then the green word is New York. But it's all out of order. Why is this? And in fact, actually, if an Arabic speaker saw this, they would interpret it as New York, Kamilé, loves, which is basically nonsensical in Arabic. So obviously this is no good. But why is it doing this way? It's because the overall flow of text is perceived to be left to right. The overall flow of information, because the base direction was set to left to right. That means that these two words came first, which is on the left side for left to right, followed by this. You might ask, why did these two words not get reversed? It's because the way the Unicode BADA algorithm works, it chunks up text into the direction of the characters itself. So it keeps all the Arabic as one chunk. So essentially we have one chunk here, Kamilé, one chunk here, loves, which then get combined into a single chunk, and then the New York is the third chunk. So how do we fix this? Well, we change the base direction. Now we're good. So again, this is Kamilé loves New York. This is perfectly readable, perfectly acceptable, and this is how we deal with this problem. If we hadn't have done this, we would have the same sentence, but incomprehensible to an Arabic speaker, despite the fact that all the letters are shaped correctly and they're being laid out right to left. But you might ask yourself, like, why do I care about this? I'm not going to be combining Arabic and English in my text. I just have like a simple application. Just Arabic is going to be the only thing that's going to be in here. My web page doesn't combine these things. Well, it turns out that this shows up much more often than you'd think. Let's add a punctuation mark. So Kamilé loves New York. Yay. This looks correct. Exclamation mark at the end of the sentence. Very good. Right? What happens if we do this in Arabic now? Note the problem here. The punctuation mark is on the far right of the sentence. That's the beginning of the Arabic sentence. Arabic punctuation works like English punctuation. It has to go to the end of a sentence. So now we have punctuation on the wrong side. I've actually seen a tattoo, by the way, like this, where all the Arabic was laid out properly. Everything was right to left, which is better than a lot of tattoos I've seen. But the punctuation marks were at the beginning of the sentences because they didn't take into account basic level directionality. So again, you have to fix it, right? Now everything looks good, right? You might be saying also, well, how am I going to deal with the fact that maybe I don't know what the text is, or do I have to actually think to myself where to go through all of my application and get all the Arabic and tag it as right to left? Well, thankfully, Unicode has come up with an algorithm that makes things a little bit easier on you, which is automatic direction. This is present in a lot of applications, and I would say most, and is definitely present in HTML. When you have automatic direction, you don't have to tag things as right to left or left to right. It does it automatically. So note that our exclamation mark is in the right spot here. If we do it in Arabic and flow of text, ooh, nice. Arabic flow of text, perfect, right? Didn't have to adjust that. How does that work? Pretty simple. It looks for the first character in the text and says, are you a right to left character, or are you a left to right character? And if it's a right to left character, we assume all the text is right to left. If it's left to right, all the text is left to right. If it's a neutral character, it skips over it until it hits a neutral character like a punctuation. It'll skip over it until it hits a strong directional character like an Arabic or Latin letter. So that makes things a lot easier. But you might actually note that there are some circumstances where it can break. For example, if the first word of your sentence is in a different directionality than what the overall text is. So for example, let's go for English, and let's swap out Kamilé's name for the Arabic version. Uh-oh. Now we got a problem. Because remember, this is an English sentence. This is intended for English speakers to read. And now it's garbage, right? And loves New York, Kamilé, exclamation mark on the wrong side. So direction is not going to work here. In this case, you do need to be able to respecify the base direction. This is why generally the right policy for doing this is to use automatic direction, but always allow your users to be able to switch it if needed. But nonetheless, the automatic direction usually works. Mostly it's edge cases that cause these problems. So the next thing that we want to think about when it comes to information flow is that it's not just text that goes through this. Like I said about with my initial example, it's all forms of information can be affected by direction, including emoji. So I'm gonna let Kamilé take it over for that.
Yes, so as Ben mentioned in his first example with the falafel equation, as we should call it, it's not in only the context of text where direction is important. This comes into play with emoji as well. People use emoji in many different ways and on many different platforms, right? You use it as reactions or replacements to words. Use it if you don't find just one emoji that explains the concept that you're trying to explain, you can string along a bunch of emoji into what we call a sequence, right? So you use a few emoji in just one sequence to express the concept you're trying to do. And when it comes to sequences, directionality also comes into play. So examples of this is maybe you're trying to show a chronological order of what happened in your day, or a summary of a recipe, or things like that. So let's take a look at the emoji sequence of I love New York, which, Ben, I feel slightly called out. But yes, I do talk about New York a little too often. But yeah, in this sequence, I've written out I heart New York in an emoji sequence. And from left to right, it makes total sense. But if someone were to read that from right to left, it's basically saying, New York loves me, which I don't find that to be true when I'm getting yelled at that I missed the elevator or something at the passport agency. Not a true story at all. But the point is, even if that were to be true, that's not the message I'm trying to convey. I'm trying to convey I heart New York. How do we fix this? Just like Ben said, this is where changing the base direction comes into play, right? So if we change the base direction, the user can input the emoji in the same order that they would, whether it's left to right or right to left, but the emoji sequence would be presented to right to left readers in the proper way so that it reads, I heart New York. So that is accurate. That's the message I'm trying to convey. So let's look at a few more examples of why this is important, why it's important to consider direction and which way you're reading the emoji sequence, whether left to right, right to left. So left to right, I left home to come to this workshop to talk to all of you and to listen to some talks. Right to left, I'm going back home after just being talking to everyone. I'm kind of tired, right? Left to right, we're seeing the phase of someone's life. They were a baby, then the adulthood, and then their older age. The other way, if you read it right to left, you're watching the movie Benjamin Button. We can bring some debates into here. Is it milk in the bowl and then cereal, or is it cereal in the bowl and then milk? Based on how you're going to read the sequence, right, it's going to change. Pretend you asked someone how did their day go. right? Yesterday or something. Right to left, this was a perfectly good day. They started their day with coffee and some eggs, had a salad for lunch, had pizza for dinner, and they even fit in some cake and some wine for the end of their day. If you read this left to right, you may be asking, like, what happened to inspire you to have wine at 7 a.m. in the morning and cake? And they'll be like, what are you talking about? You're reading it in the wrong direction, right? This is the conversations you had, right? Instructions for laundry. Left to right is a perfectly good sequence to explain how to do laundry. And the other way, a poor college student who's doing laundry for the first time completely messes up their laundry, right? And the last one, which features one of our other ESR members' favorite emoji, the passport check. Right to left, you leave home at a reasonable time, you check your bag, you get through passport check, which is a real emoji, and I wanted to show you that. You have some time, you have a cocktail, and then you depart for your destination. The other way you can interpret it as you missed your flight, you're distressed about it, you have a drink. You get through passport check anyway, you're like, I have to find some other flight. Then you give up and you go home, right? Everyone's done this. No? Okay. Anyway, so the past sequence, the sequences that we looked here are all emoji with neutral directionality. But when you're looking at more than 3,000 emoji, that's around the number that we are at, there's more than one type of direction. And so that's what we're going to be talking about next. There's neutral, agentive, and semantic. And if I go to the next slide, I'll try to explain to you a little more about how the ESR categorized all these thousands of emoji into these categories. So the ESR for Unicode 15.1, we're investigating directionality in emoji to figure out, okay, do some emoji have their own direction, and does it impact the context of the sequence they're in based on its own individual direction? It turns out that there is, in some cases, there is an important difference in the context. So neutral ones, as we looked at, these don't have their own direction. It doesn't matter what side the spoon is facing, right? But when we look at agentive, these are emoji that they don't have their own, they're not expressing movement themselves, but in certain contexts, it is important which way they're facing. So we call this, it's not the strongest type of directionality, but if the megaphone is facing this way, then it's kind of indicating that sound is being blasted off into this direction. Or if the microphone is facing this way, it's indicating who's speaking in the sequence. The hammer is pointing to what is being fixed, and the telescope is pointing to what is being magnified or what is being investigated. Semantic, however, is the strongest form of directionality that the ESR identified. So running, biking, rowing, driving, these are all emoji that express motion within themselves. And we found that these were the ones that had the strongest meaning of direction when put into a sequence, which way you're running, which way you're biking, and so on. So as I said, many emoji fell into these categories. But ultimately, for 15.1, 18 base emoji were added flipped variants. That's different ways of saying it, but flipped variants. So these are the emoji that now have an encoding for reversing the directionality. You may be asking, why only these emoji? There's a few reasons for that. One being, so when the ESR is looking into encoding any emoji, typically we're very conservative about what we're encoding and how many emoji we're encoding. One of the most important factors is how frequently something's going to be used and how global something is and how general the usage is. And so when we evaluated all of that emoji, all the emoji that fell into the semantic category, these were the most base emoji that would be most useful to have a flipped variant of for cases like right to left, and we'll get into that. Other reasons were that uniform directionality is important across vendors. So as you may know, there's multiple platforms, multiple vendors that make emoji fonts, and all these fonts have different designs. We try to make it as uniform as possible, and that's part of the whole purpose of the ESR. And all of these emoji, the major vendors all had facing the same direction, so that when someone intentionally flips an emoji, it's going to be consistently facing that intended direction, consistently across most, if not all, vendors. And lastly, a small set of a change like this is easier to adopt for multiple vendors. And if we saw wider usage of these flip variants, then that would open up doors for us to look into further adding more directionality to more emoji. So these are some examples. I'm going to try really hard not to go into a deep dive of how to encode emoji, but there's something called emoji switch sequences. So maybe you'll hear this tomorrow. Encode emoji either has a code point or a switch sequence. That is some ways of encoding an emoji. These emoji were encoded as a sequence. So the emoji you see on the left with the arrows are actually the sequence included with a special Unicode character, the 0 with joiner. When you combine those, you get the flip variant. And that's how that is how we added functionality for these flip variants. And Ben is now going to show us some usages of this, and as well as some pitfalls of if this is not managed properly, what could happen, what could go wrong.
Thanks a lot, Kamilé. So when we're talking about sequences of emoji, the way that we can reverse the sequence while still, keep in mind, these are the same code point order. So it's the same, inputted in the same sequence. So the I and then the heart and then the New York. So when this is modified for a right to left script user by changing the base direction, it'll flip. Note that you can't use the automatic direction for this because there's nothing in this sequence that indicates to the software which direction this should be read. There's no Arabic letters in here, so we don't know if this is or Hebrew letters. There's nothing indicating to the software that this should be read by. This is intended to be read by a Hebrew or Arabic speaker. So in this case, you have to manually set the direction. So, but nonetheless, it seems like we have a pretty good methodology for swapping the sequences of emoji. But as Kamilé was mentioning, directionality actually ends up mattering here. Let's look at this sentence. Bear. And there's Kamilé running away from the bear to the tent. This looks good. I think it looks pretty good. Looks pretty solid. Let's go ahead and change that to Arabic. Flib. That means bear in Arabic. Again, Kamilé is running away from it. But however, the Arabic is messed up. Look, the exclamation point's on the wrong side. Remember, this is Arabic. It should go after the word, right? Well, no problem. We'll just change the direction auto, and that should fix it, right? Because there's Arabic letters in there. Software knows that this is supposed to be right to left, so this should handle it. Perfect. Wait. What's the meaning of this now? Now it looks like Kamilé is running into the open arms of the bear. This is not good. This is exactly opposite of. I mean, maybe it means bear. Yay! I'm going to run towards the bear. Generally not recommended. The Forest Service recommends you don't do this. So how do we deal with this? Well, the good news is that since Unicode added emoji that can be flipped, we could just flip this emoji to be running right. There is no automatic way of doing this at this point because it's not integrated into BIDA algorithms or any other bits of emoji, or sorry, bits of Unicode official software. But I did write a little tiny little library that I will hopefully publish soon on NPM that'll let you just integrate this as a component. But an automatic flipper. Boom. And so now Kamilé is appropriately running towards the tent, right? And the flipper works so that it actually detects the overall direction of the text to begin with. It knows this is a left to right. We can even do a little if you want. We know it's left to right. And simply by changing the text, it got detected to be a right to left, and also flip the emoji. It's pretty simple how this works. If you're curious, it just uses it breaks the string into grapheme clusters, grabs any grapheme clusters that's flippable, and then if an HTML element that it's in happens to be right to left, then it inserts the zooage sequence to flip them. And it works on any of the emoji that are possible to flip at this point. The 6 emoji or the 18 emoji that Kamilé mentioned. So if Kamilé was in a wheelchair, she'd still be escaping from the bear. We're good. If she decided to maybe like mosey, instead away from the bear, or like if she just decided to give up and take a knee, then we're good. But ultimately, like the sort of what this talk is about is that you can see how something as very basic as the overall direction of how information flows can completely change the meaning of not just text, but even symbolic sequences like emoji. And this also affects even things like how how's your user interfaces designs, things like that. And if you are only used to using left to right writing systems, if you are only familiar with Latin and Cyrillic and Devanagari, you may sort of have an implicit assumption that information flows from right to left, and you will incorporate that into your designs. You'll incorporate that into your software. But as soon as you present this to people for whom their script is right to left, Arabic users, Hebrew users, Syriac users, Nko users, Adlam users, you're going to end up creating total changes in the semantics of what you're talking about. Things that seem to be going forward will be going backwards. The order of events may change. Text might get garbled in a way that you may not expect. And so there are tools for helping to deal with this. Automatic direction detection is one of them. But as you see, it doesn't always work all the time. It usually works most of the time. But just keep in mind that that might need to be modified in some way. The users may need to modify it itself. There's no heuristic that's going to be perfect for this. When we looked at the I Love New York, there's nothing in here in the text itself that can be detected. So you have to be able to make sure that either you know who's using your software or who's on your website in terms of which language they use and what direction they're expecting, or you allow them to switch it themselves to make sure that everything is clear. But ultimately, this is what I'm trying to say. We need to break our assumptions that things go from left to right. When you're designing anything, rather than even thinking about like how this will be implemented or something like that, stop and say, what would this look like if I imagine time running from the right and going to the left? Well, imagine the flow of information and look at that with anything you're designing, if you're designing it for a global audience. So just as long as you keep that in mind, you can design things properly. Even if you have to do everything manually, you can't use all these automatic tools, at least you'll know what kind of problems are in front of you. So I hope if there's anything that you can take away from this, just try to keep that in mind. Thank you. Kamilé?
And now with our remainder of our time, as Ben said, we're really just trying to spark some discussion of directionality in general and with emoji, and a question that we wanted to leave all of you, and you can answer it here, we can have a discussion here, or you can take with you, is what are some instances or platforms where automatically flipping the emoji direction, as Ben showed you, would be good versus confusing?
So
we could take that. We could take any question.
Yeah. Any question at all you'd like to ask? Right here in the maroon.
I was just wondering if a new property is going to be added to the Unicode character database that'll tell us which emoji are flippable, just in case there's no font support for it, because you talked about replacing an emoji with a ZWJ sequence
Mhm.
in order, because that would require font support to do
Right.
a sequence replacement. What if that font support wasn't there, but I could just mirror it in the renderer? I just want to know which characters I should be doing that to.
So this is what you're going to be looking for, is like the those
So I mean,
emoji, the
okay,
base
so
emoji.
I was talking about where Ben was automatically detecting whether the emoji should be replaced with the ZWJ sequence.
hard-coded.
Okay.
So as far as I know, and actually Kamilé would be able to answer this better, there is no Unicode property that indicates whether an emoji is flippable. So
How hard would it be to get that?
I don't touch emoji.
Ned, actually. Yes.
Please.
Yeah, so,
Oh yeah.
so the question of like what sequences exist. So all of these sequences are what are referred to as RGI, or recommended for general interchange. So basically, practically there's nothing stopping an implementation from looking at individual sequences and saying, oh, it meets the structure of one of these flipped sequences. They're always going to end in that same, it's going to be a switch character and then this words facing emoji. So there's nothing stopping an implementation from doing that for all emoji. But as to which sequences are expected to behave that way is governed by the list of sequences that's published in each version of the emoji/Unicode standard. But note also that one of the properties of RGI sequences is that the emoji working group, or whatever, committee thing, people. Anyway, thank you. ESR, one of the things that the ESR tries to take into account is that the unsupported sequence renders in a way that offers the user a clue as to what it's supposed to mean, right? So it's not like, so like one thing to note is that all of these flip sequences are like recursive, like that arrow is applied to another sequence, right? And so, if you look at the actual encoding, there are multiple characters involved in like the runner or whatever, that are themselves composed with another switch component to make the flipped form. But the idea is that, since there's always going to be a question of uptake in terms of implementations, right? Because the Unicode standard gets, updated, and then it takes a while for vendors to update their implementations. And so the idea with this encoding of the sequence is that arrow being there as a guide to the user, a suggestion that something will be happening that, they can be taught to understand until their software can do it automatically. So the answer is, it is technically possible, although it wouldn't be a property of emoji characters, because again, these are sequences. So it would have to be a property of strings. That is, you'd have a set of strings to which you could apply that. But this is a good question. Like, if it is helpful to do that, that's one thing. But if then again, implementers are just going to look at the RGI sequences and do it based on that, then maybe it's not necessary to spin up a whole new property for this use case that hopefully is going to be resolved in short order.
Right. I'll talk to you a little bit more.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Thank you. I'm wondering, when flipping a emoji, is it as simple or literally mirroring it, or are there other considerations? I'm thinking, for example, like a X and Y axes flipped mirrored would maybe not be so correct. But of the ones that are flippable, are there other considerations besides just mirroring?
I don't know what the slideshow is. Right now it's really just it's really these flipped emoji. Like, we haven't considered, I don't think we haven't considered like the other flipping over other axes, but it's really just like the right arrow pointing this way means that it's going to be flipped towards this way. I'm not answering it very well, but I think that's something we could consider. It's more about like things that are facing left, we want to be able to face right. But right now it's just these emoji that have that ability. But I mean, that is what the ESR recommends as part of the RGI that Ned mentioned. You could do more in your software if you wanted to.
I was just noting that fascinating. That in relation to what you were talking about there, this is no to color emoji. It is just a mirroring, because it appears that when Kamilé is walking left, she's a lefty. When she's right, she's a righty. So you have noticed something interesting
Right,
here.
along those lines, yeah.
Probably not terribly semantic in this case, but perhaps for other emoji that might get added. So
Yeah,
Or if there's like a, like a number that appears inside the emoji, then the number would also be mirrored and therefore unreadable or something like that.
absolutely. Further questions? Noah?
Hey. One thing that I find interesting is the difference in emoji usage for, say, these strings of text versus standalone usage. Say, take common iconography, which is like I often have a subset of emoji, the shopping cart, the magnifying glass, and so forth, that we see on a lot of sites for like search or e-commerce. And I've done some audits of sites for like what we would need to support right to left or bidirectional for Arabic or Hebrew, and seen that, well, we would need to flip the shopping cart to the other direction to fit in with our right to left UI. But we'd keep that magnifying glass the same because the majority of our users in the Middle East are right-handed. And when used in in the sequence of text, I could see that flip working out well. But in the standalone case, we've got this use case for keeping it the same regardless of if it's in a right to left context.
That's a very fascinating point. I didn't even think about it in terms of handedness for the magnifying glass. But yeah, I was just doing that with my hands. I'm like, oh yeah. But yeah, definitely for like a shopping cart, you can imagine that if you want like a feeling in your design that you're going out towards the exit with your shopping cart, you want it to be going to the left if you're on a Hebrew website, but to the right if you're on an English website. Fascinating.
And these are questions that were coming up and continue to come up in the ESR when we were doing these directionality audits, which is partly I'm realizing why I don't have answers, like complete answers for you, because this is still something that is being investigated, right? Like we started with the adding directionality to those 18 base emoji just to like get started with this and to see like how they would be used. But we certainly have, as I showed the other like the shopping cart would be agentive, right? In that category of it somewhat has some directionality. It doesn't have as strong of a directionality. But again, even that could be argued, like which one does it go into, because a shopping cart can move. It gets more and more layered as we like consider it further. And for that reason, I don't have the straightest answers for you, but this was more about sparking these questions in the first place.
Yeah, and I can tell it has. But for the record, I don't recommend running from bears. Instead, I propose we encode a bear spray emoji so that we can protect ourselves from emoji bears.
Is this on? It is not on. How do I? There we go. Yeah, part of me is thinking that if you're going to add more potentially flippable emoji, then over time the character combiner sequence is going to become more and more unwieldy, because under the hood you're adding extra text. And if anything goes wrong, like in the shopping cart example, maybe you only have room for one character to display, and now you've got this overset text, and who knows how that's going to wind up. So it seems like somehow embedding the flippability property in the character would make more sense. And it also feels like having an ability for app designers to toggle that property So maybe not all emoji inherently have it turned on, but app designers could decide, no, we want this to flip automatically, or we don't want this to flip automatically. That's just what I've thought of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You wanna say something?
Yeah, just that, well, first of all, I was going to say that in terms of, say, your shopping cart, if you are doing anything in your design that's counting code points, you're making a mistake. That's Manish has actually written a great article called "Let's Stop Ascribing Meaning to Code Points," because we need to talk about. Well, we use graphing clusters primarily as the idea of what a character is. The word character is a little bit of a complicated word, but I think as I pulled this up, this running person to the right, running one to the right, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 code points. It doesn't matter if it's 8 code points or 6 or whatever. It should still be displayed as a single code point, of course. Go ahead. What's up?
Yeah, no. I was more thinking of a context in which the number of characters, of units that are actually displayed.
Yeah.
What if your UI designer only has room to show the shopping cart, and it's trying to show shopping cart left arrow, and now you've got this extra symbol floating around that's not in the that's not doing what it should in the visual design of your site.
So what you're saying is that if you have a font failure where it's falling back to having the
Displaying the
plus,
arrow.
yeah, then I mean you should get better fonts.
But also, yes, but also there's a reason why that there is that fallback is so it's not ideal that you see the shopping, which by the way, clarifying, shopping cart is not an RGI, is not a recommended sequence for Zwidge yet. I don't know, but say it was. If you had a font that didn't support both directions of this shopping cart or other emoji, the arrow would be indicating what direction it's supposed to be facing. It's not ideal, but that is also what we have to think about when it comes to backwards compatibility and fallback.
I had a
Oh.
question. Here you've got these sequences that let you override the physical direction of the thing. Have folks experimented with or really produced any keyboards that can kind of like what's a good UI for exposing this to end users?
I can answer that actually.
Sure.
Yeah. The only one I've seen so far is Android. That is not because it's mostly because I haven't looked, to be perfectly honest. But on Android, the exposure is that when you long press on any of the flippable emoji, people have probably seen when you long press on an emoji, you'll get all the say like the skin tone differences or maybe the gender differences. There's also a little left-right arrow on the top. You click that and they'll go to the right. So.
Yeah, my main worry was for someone who doesn't know what's going on under the hood, the difference between an emoji with no particular direction at all versus an emoji forced to go in the direction that it already goes in on your font is very subtle.
If I believe, by the way, that correct me if I'm wrong, that the emoji subcommittee or whatever they're called now, what are they called?
ESR.
ESR. ESR does say that these emojis that were picked should display as left facing by default and only become right facing. So there's no way to add a left arrow to anything.
There's no
You can only add a right arrow to things to these.
Cool, thank you.
So
Yeah, that's happening.
My question is not specific to emojis, but just about directionality that you mentioned in the beginning of the New York example. Are there any consideration for in the case where there's a new line? Because that's when I noticed most of the issues it would be good on the first line, but then the second line, everything gets mixed up. So is that something that you guys are working on?
Okay, so one of the problems when you're dealing with mixed text is that there's no right answer to anything. There really isn't. I'm someone who reads Arabic, and there is literally no way that I can figure out is the right way. So for example, what you're asking for is essentially like if you had a bunch of Arabic text and then you had say 2 Latin words and there's a line break in between them and then you got more Arabic text. and how confusing that is, because usually, according to the BIDA algorithm, it should go Arabic, first English word, second English word, Arabic, which is just real weird. But all of the alternatives are worse. Is basically what it is. And so I do believe that the BIDA algorithm is doing the best that we can do. But these are those things where essentially there's not a right answer. There's just like, well, it's kind of like the automatic detection algorithm, where there's like, this is about the best we can do given the data. So I will tell you, by the way, that if you do try to implement other types of automatic direction detection, I'm looking at you, Twitter. It goes chaos. Like basically Twitter, in certain circumstances, will just make anything that has any right to left character in it right to left base direction. That's bad, especially when you're someone like me who tweets where they insert Arabic characters into English. It just makes a whole jumble of chaos. But anyways, so it's the best we can do. How about that?
Okay, yeah, because it's just an extra note. I think you don't come across like different languages in one sentence usually, but it usually when it's like Arabic and then numbers, because those are considered to be Latin. So.
Yes, exactly. I actually skipped numbers for this talk because I don't want to confuse the heck out of people. But yeah, numbers can definitely cause this problem as well too. Although sequences of numbers should, if it's one number, it shouldn't be line broken. But yeah, if you get something like a phone number or something like that, you could have this problem.
The BIDA algorithm has special handling for numbers, so it doesn't change the automatic detection the way like English in Arabic would, because they're still numbers.
Yes,
they're different.
Yeah, but when you break across lines, it still goes to chaos. So this fella.
So I guess my company is like kind of like a still primitive on the bidirectional support, and maybe for emojis and maybe for like icons, So every time like flippable icon, for bidirectional or not, when there's that question comes up, right? Then we've been just contacting Arabic or Hebrew, experts, and get their opinions. Is there any like a go-to documentation, like this kind of case? Probably it's like a flip. Other cases don't flip, kind of thing.
That's a great question. I don't believe that there's any sort of standard for this, unfortunately, that you could access. There's some information in things like, I don't know if you know what ALREC is. Which is W3C documents, ALREQ, that has a basic overview of how to lay out text in Arabic. I'm not sure exactly how complete it is at this point, but it's in his family of other ones like JLREC for Japanese and things like this. So you might find some information there, but that's actually a great question, and honestly, it would be a great thing to have, that kind of thing. But one of the other issues is, and this actually kind of gets to your point as well too, for some of these, there is no right answer. Like you might end up getting different opinions on what the correct way of going about this is. So in that case, maybe the best thing to do is poll your users.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Manish, did you remember your question? Or did you ask her?
Thank you.
Clearly.
All right, thank you, everyone. And we've got a 10-minute break before the next talk.
And thanks, Ned, for jumping in.